Some years ago, as opposed to years ago, at least a couple of years before the house fire in 2014, Joyce left the house one Friday evening for an evening of fun with her live-action role-playing gaming group. Joyce was a theater major, and it gave her a chance to use her acting without actually having to rehearse a play for 6 weeks. I can't recall anymore whether I was planning on joining them a bit later to kibitz with a couple of the wives who often came along and didn't game. But what I can remember quite clearly is that Joyce was back at the house only a few minutes later. Naturally, I asked Joyce what had happened. She told me that as she was driving down the road a couple of houses from us, in fact, it was right across from her grandmother's old house, a yearling fawn had run headlong into the driver's side door of her Dodge Dakota pickup. The fawn had broken its neck and was dead, so Joyce had dragged it onto a tarp she had taken out of the bed of her truck. Then she'd walked back up to the house. What she wanted from me was my help in hoisting the fawn onto the truck bed. Now, it just so happened that our friend who was hosting the gamers that evening can dress venison. Since this was a clean kill, it would be safe for our friend to prepare the venison. Anyway, I helped Joyce lift the fawn into the bed of the truck, and as we did, Joyce said a few quiet words to send the fawn's spirit on its way, as she described it. Now, this sort of thing has been fairly common throughout history. Many traditional cultures, including the various Native American ones, would thank the animals they hunted and killed for food because the animal had given its life so that the humans could live. Closer to our own history and tradition, we read in Richard Elliott Friedman's book, Who Wrote the Bible, on pages 91 and 92, the function of sacrifice is one of the most misunderstood matters in the Bible. Modern readers often take it to mean the unnecessary taking of animal life, or they believe that the person who offered the sacrifice was giving up something of his or her own in order to compensate for some sin, or perhaps to win God's favor. In the biblical world, however, the most common type of sacrifice was for meals. The apparent rationale was that if humans wanted to eat meat, they had to recognize that they were taking life. They could not regard this as an ordinary act of daily secular life. It was a sacred act, to be performed in a prescribed manner by an appointed person, a priest, at an altar. A portion of the sacrifice, a tithe, was given to the priest. This applied to all meat meals, but not fish or fowl. I didn't have a problem with any of this. In fact, I agree enough with Joyce's perspective that if I can't finish a restaurant meal and can't take it with me, I always make a point of finishing the meat portion of the meal because a creature with some sentience died so that I might live. Nevertheless, I told Joyce to make sure that she never served me any of the venison. Now, part of the reason was that given what I've read and heard about venison, including that gamey taste it can have, I've just never been particularly interested in eating any. And no, I didn't see Bambi until the year I was in England, so that particular movie had absolutely nothing to do with my attitude. Nothing about Bambi's mother. But the main reason for what I told Joyce was that I won't eat an animal if I've been to its funeral. And I considered what she said there at the back of the pickup to be the truncated equivalent of a funeral for the yearling. That was enough to transform the fawn's status, if you will, from hunter's prey to something much more akin to a companion animal, at least for me. The case which started me thinking about all this happened 12 years ago, when I came across a series of online news articles about Green Mountain College in Vermont. The school, which was founded by the Methodists in 1834, so it was about the same age as Guilford, and it existed for 185 years before finally closing in 2019, had an environmental focus and a working, sustainable farm. There were 2 oxen on that farm. Some of you might remember this story. They were yoke mates, and they'd been there for 10 years or so and were named Bill and Lou. That was the first mistake. Isn't that right, Carolyn? You never name the cow. In the summer of 2012, Lou developed an ankle injury which didn't get any better, and the college made the decision to euthanize the oxen and use the meat in the school dining room. This caused an outcry among animal rights activists who had found a farm animal sanctuary which had agreed to take both animals, and although some students had voted, when asked, in favor of their college administration's decision about Lou, a substantial portion of the student body hadn't agreed with that plan. Over the years, many students had come to regard the oxen almost as mascots or companions, which had made the animals campus personalities. They had even attended college graduations, apparently. In the end, the college issued a statement that Lou had been euthanized on the 11th of November of 2012 and buried in an undisclosed location, and that Bill had been retired from farm work. And apparently they can't train a new ox to replace the old one and have the 2 work as a team. I don't know why. It's just one of those things. The taboo against the slaughter and consumption of companion animals is very old and very strong. As far as I'm aware, the earliest explicit articulation of the taboo against eating companion animals or pets, even when they would normally be considered stock animals, which are farmed for their meat, can be found in 2 Samuel 12. To put the text in its proper context, King David has just been up to his infamous shenanigans with Bathsheba. After he committed adultery with her and arranged for the convenient death of her husband on a foreign battlefield, David has married Bathsheba himself, which is useful for him because she's carrying his child. We pick up the story at the end of the last verse of chapter 11, which is 11:27, and we'll be reading down to the first part of verse 7 in chapter 12. And the thing David had done was evil in the eyes of the Lord. And the Lord sent Nathan, the prophet, to David, and he came to him and said to him, there were two men there were in a single town. One was rich and the other poor. The rich man had sheep and cattle in great abundance, and the poor man had nothing save one little ewe lamb that he had bought, and he nurtured her and raised her with him together with his sons. From his crust she would eat, and from his cup she would drink. And in his lap she would lie, and she was like to him a daughter. And a wayfarer came to the rich man, and it seemed a pity to him to take from his own sheep and cattle to prepare for the traveler who had come to him. And he took the poor man's ewe and prepared it for the man who had come to him. And David's anger flared hot against the man, and he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, doomed is the man who has done this. And Let's see. And the poor man's ewe he shall pay back fourfold, inasmuch as he has done this thing, and because he had no pity. And Nathan said to David, "You are the man." Obviously, this is a fairly complex story with a number of layers. The simplest reading is that this is a parable which the prophet Nathan tells King David in order to open David's eyes to the enormity of what he's just done. Then there are the themes of theft, which is a conclusion David himself reaches when he orders that the rich man make fourfold restitution for the lamb, which was, of course, the usual penalty for theft under the law of Moses. And then there's the depredations of the rich against the poor. But what's especially striking is that the very last words out of David's mouth are literally, "He had no pity." This strongly suggests that David's reaction to the story, like ours, is that the whole business is made worse somehow by the fact that the poor man's lamb was the family pet. But you can trace that sort of animal-human relationship much further back in time than the story in 2 Samuel. I don't know if any of you have heard about this, but in September of 2020, archaeologists unearthed an 8,400-year-old burial in Sweden in the middle of a Neolithic hunting settlement which was on the coast at the time. Someone had laid a dog to rest alongside a man, presumably the dog's master, and among the grave goods were objects which were apparently included because they were the dog's toys. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. Or in other words, the more things change, the more they remain the same. As I said earlier, the taboo against the slaughter and consumption of companion animals is very old and very strong, and it really isn't hard to see why. Once animals have associated and bonded with humans over an extended period of time, the nature of the animal-human relationship has been fundamentally changed. The animals come to trust at least some humans on an almost instinctual level, and the humans with whom the animals have interacted and bonded come to see these creatures not as mere animals, but more as individuals. This is accentuated when the humans involved have conferred upon the animals any of the trappings of human individuality, like names. When you name an animal, you confer individuality upon it. You make the animal a companion, a pet, a friend, even an honorary quasi-human. You make it a member of the family. And you don't kill your friends or your family for food. What's more difficult, to eat venison for dinner or Bambi's mother? It's much harder to eat the Easter bunny than rabbit stew. It's much harder to eat Wilbur, the pig from Charlotte's Web, or Babe than pork chops. In such circumstances, to send the animals involved to the slaughterhouse is quite simply cruel, both to the animals and to the humans who have come to regard them as more than mere beasts. It is perhaps most akin to slaughtering the family dog or cat, and is increasingly viewed with revulsion by civilized persons. This is quite possibly because many of us no longer raise stock animals with the expectation that these creatures will one day be consumed by humans, including ourselves. This may also be why the sad tale of Ferdinand, the winner of the 1986 Kentucky Derby, strikes such a chord in so many people. After Ferdinand was retired from racing, he was purchased by Japanese buyers in 1994 and sent to a stud farm over there. But after 8 rather undistinguished years at that, and an unsuccessful attempt to place the gentle-natured stallion, and we do have the testimony of a groom who had interacted with the horse as to how gentle the horse was. Anybody could lead Ferdinand with a simple halter. Anyway, after an unsuccessful attempt to place the gentle-natured stallion with a riding club, Ferdinand was sent to slaughter in 2002 and most likely became pet food. Just in case you haven't heard, all 2 of you, I've been watching the new version of All Creatures Great and Small on PBS, which of course is based on the career of Alf White, or James Alfred White, who was a vet in the North Yorkshire town of Thirsk. And in fact, the house which became known in the books and the series as Skeldale House is right across the road from the Quaker meeting in Thirsk, which has been there since the lifetime of George Fox or just after. I've also been binge watching the old version from the 1970s and 80s, and there's an episode at the end of the 4th series of the old version called For Richer, for Poorer. In it, Tristan Farnan, played by Peter Davison, whom some of you might remember as Doctor Who. He was the 5th Doctor, I think. Anyway, Tristan has to go around to see a pig farmer who has a problem. The man, whose name is Kit Bilton, becomes so attached to his animals, which he always makes the mistake of naming, that he can't bear to slaughter them for food when the time comes. Or remember the old MASH episode called Private Charles Lamb. Radar can't bear to see the lamb that the Greeks have supplied for Easter dinner killed and eaten, so he tricks Henry into signing papers discharging Private Charles Lamb from the army and sending him on a plane to Iowa to become Radar's little brother. The upshot is that Hawkeye and Trapper John have to get all the Greeks drunk on ouzo and substitute a spam lamb for the real one. I could give other examples, but you get the point. Many people are sensitive to our treatment of animals. This is because how we treat animals so often mirrors how we treat each other. In fact, deliberate animal cruelty is regarded nowadays as one of the warning signs that a person is mentally disturbed severely. In 1960, at Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, archaeologists discovered the partial remains of 10 Neanderthal men, women, and children. One of the individuals, a man known today as Shanidar I, lived between 35 and 50 years, which is remarkable in itself for an individual who lived at least 45,000 years ago. But what was really remarkable about him was that for the last 10 to 15 years of his life, Shanidar I suffered from a variety of ailments which essentially destroyed his ability to contribute all that much to the settlement where he lived. He was blind in one eye due to a violent blow in the face. He had a withered, fractured right arm, and also leg and foot deformities, which likely gave him a painful limp. Shanidar I had impaired hearing as well, and he suffered from advanced degenerative joint disease. Arthritis is as old as that. In other words, he wouldn't have survived for those last 10 or 15 years of his life without daily care and help with food. They took care of him. And not only him, Neanderthal teeth show that at least some of them had been chewing poplar, a source of salicylic acid, which a natural painkiller rather like unrefined aspirin and not as good as chewing willow bark. Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose indeed. Without being aware of it, even the Neanderthals had come upon one of the fundamental values of modern human society: interconnectedness. It's a very old value, as we've seen. And there's a similar progression in the Bible, where the question is about the steady expansion of the definition of the people of God, from the family of Abraham to the nation of Israel. The Levites added the principles that we should treat immigrants well and that we should love our neighbors as ourselves, Leviticus 19:18, which is where Jesus quoted it from. Jesus, for his part, in response to the question, "And who is my neighbor?" tells the parable of the Good Samaritan and expands the definition to include anybody who needs our help. The early church expanded the definition yet again to include all the Gentiles, following the example of Jesus and the ending of the book of Jonah, where God asks, "And shall I not have pity for Nineveh, the great city, in which there are many more than 120,000 human beings who do not know between their right hand and their left, and many beasts?" In our fractured times of increasing isolation and political and religious polarization, we need to be more connected to each other, the other life on this planet, and the planet itself, not less. And if you don't remember anything else I've said this morning, remember that. Amen.